But Tony's going to share his testimony, so let's give him a big round of applause and say welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity, John. As he said, my name is Tony Nasrallah. I was born and raised right here in Jacksonville. And I grew up in a family that went to Presbyterian churches. And one thing about Presbyterian churches is they do a good job of teaching children the basics of the faith. So as I grew up in this Presbyterian home, I felt like they did a pretty good job, especially as an elementary age kid, teaching me facts. And I learned those facts just like I was learning facts about historical figures. And there wasn't any of it that I really contested. I believed it, and I had this head knowledge. And I went through confirmation, and they asked me some questions, and I gave them the answers, and I was a member of the church. So wow, how about that? And after confirmation, I had a thriving business. I was in the 6th grade going into the 7th grade. I had a lawn mowing business, and I realized that Sunday morning was a really good time to mow lawns. So right after confirmation, my parents basically stopped saying you have to go to church. So I said, okay, I'm going to start mowing lawns, and basically dropped out of church after confirmation. Was not involved other than maybe Christmas, Easter, those types of things. Was not involved all through middle school, high school, first year college. And unfortunately started hanging out with all the hellraisers that lived in Avondale. That's where I was raised, in Avondale. I ran the mean streets of Avondale. So during those years, I was, even though I knew about God, I was really far from the Lord, to be honest. And there were several people during those years, probably from middle school all the way until my 2nd year of college, that shared a very clear gospel message with me. And just about every time that gospel message was shared with me, my response was, oh yeah, I'm good with God. I know all about God. I'm good. And I just basically, didn't really go any further than that. And at the beginning of my 2nd year of college, I decided to do a field study at the University of Montana. That involved 2 months of backpacking where I got a full quarter's worth of credits. And the way I decided to get into Montana, I didn't decide to get into Montana by a Greyhound bus, but I was going to be going from Jacksonville to Montana to start this field study. And the air traffic controllers went on strike, if y'all remember that, in the fall of 1981. So I couldn't fly to Missoula, Montana, so I had to take a Greyhound bus to Missoula, Montana from Jacksonville. Has anybody ever taken a bus ride like that? 60 hours, 2.5 days straight on a bus. Wow. And one of the highlights was when they pulled up into Minneapolis at 3 in the morning, and this was in the summer, and they said, all right, everybody's got to get off for some reason, do something to the bus. And it was like 50 degrees, and anyway, that was the highlight of the trip. So I get into Missoula, I meet these 2 instructors, there's 10 students. We spend 2 months in the Bob Marshall Wilderness area, seeing the most beautiful country in America. I believe we ended up in Glacier Park. We did 4 2-week trips out to roadless areas in the wilderness, and it was a God experience. But even then, even though I could feel the presence of God, I still was far from God. Once the trip was over, I was trying to figure out how to get back home, and I knew there was one way that I did not want to get home. You guessed it, I was not going to take Greyhound. So after this course was over, I spent some time on the University of Montana. The professors that did this course let me pitch my tent in their backyard, and so I stayed in their backyard, which is just a couple blocks off campus. I was able to use the gym and that kind of stuff for showers, and I was able to use the library. So I kicked around the University of Montana doing like a term paper to wrap up this field study. And I started looking at the ride boards. So I thought, oh, that's what I'm going to do. And it was getting close to Thanksgiving, so I started putting these notices, looking to get to Florida. Does anybody want to split gas money? Just all these, let's find somebody that's going home for Thanksgiving to Florida from Montana. And not a single person that I could find was heading to Florida for the holidays. But people started telling me about the freight trains. And the freight trains in Missoula only went east and west. And a lot of college kids were pretty adept at hopping the freights and getting to maybe whatever town nearby in eastern Washington or western Washington or eastern Montana. And they kind of gave me a little rundown on hopping on trains. And they said you kind of stay on the edge of the yard. You don't let any of the brakemen or any of the workers see you. Once the train starts, you find a box car, you jump in it, and you have a nice, rough, bumpy ride, but it's cheap. And they said, don't befriend the hobos, just keep yourself, and hey, it's a good way to go. So I thought, well, I know I have my compass. I can figure out which way is east, and that's the way I wanted to go. So I went to the train yard. It was about 5 p.m. this evening. It was kind of mid-November, getting close to Thanksgiving. And I decided, all right, I'm going to do this. And I had a backpack which I had extra provisions in, so it probably weighed about 50 or 60 pounds. And I was on the edge of the yard, and the train was there, it wasn't moving, and I knew I was going to jump on it, but I had not actually walked all the way up to the train to figure out how tall the boxcar was, and I hadn't really figured that out. So the train starts moving towards me really, really slow. I mean, you can walk faster than that at this point, but I see it coming, and I'm getting my stuff ready, and I'm thinking, all right, this is going to be cool. Yeah, it's going to be good. And it's getting closer, and it's just about temperature where it might snow, but it was just spitting rain, and it was just after the sun had just set, because in Montana I think the sun sets at about 4, so it was getting dark, it was a little rainy, and the train's approaching me, and my heart's starting to beat fast, and I'm thinking, I'm going to do this. And I thought, well, what if I don't quite make it up with this backpack? I know, I'll throw the backpack on and then I'll climb up. And I thought, well, what if I get separated from my backpack? That wouldn't be good. I said, well, I'm not sure what oh man, and what if I fall and I fall under the train and the train runs over me and cuts me in half? I'd be sitting out there where they wouldn't find me for days or weeks. And so I reverted to my childhood. And that is, all right, God, help me get home. And that might have been the first prayer I had prayed in a long time. But I literally asked God to help me get home. As the train approached me, I noticed that there was 2 engines on this particular train. As the first engine went by, I see it coming towards me, and I'm looking at it, and I see there's a ladder at the front of the engine, and there's a ladder at the back of the engine. So as the second engine starts to go past me, I jump on one of the ladders. So instead of getting in the box car, I'm climbing up on the engine. Of course, the engineer sees me standing there with this backpack and these wide eyes, so he keeps an eye on me, and he sees me climbing up the ladder, so he comes from the first engine back to the second engine and says, what are you doing? You gotta go get in a boxcar. And I said, listen, I'm just a poor college kid. I'm just trying to get, home. I don't have much money, and I won't cause any problem. And he asked me a few questions, and he wanted to make sure I wasn't a fugitive, wasn't running away from home. He knew Missoula was the home of the University of Montana. I told him the next stop I was getting off was Laurel, which is where the next main station was. So I guess he just figured out I won't cause any problems. So he said, yeah, whatever. So he opened up the cabin to the second engine, and he said, have a good trip. And basically there was a heater, there was a head, there was a water fountain, there was a cushioned seat, and it was basically first class accommodations in my own private car to Laurel. Got to Laurel the next morning, the train stops there, I get off the train, I go right across the street. It's a very rural area, there's a little diner. I sit in this diner and just drink coffee after coffee after coffee until I see that it looks like the train's getting ready to go again. So I decide that, you know what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to hop back in, the engine and keep going. Well, somebody saw me at that point. They saw me get in, so the train started to move and then it stopped. And of course, I didn't have a clue. And 3 guys in coats and ties showed up and said, hey, you're trespassing, you could be arrested, but hit the road. So that was the extent of my train travels. So fortunately, the train station in Laurel, Montana is right by Interstate 90, so I got my trusty thumb out. And from there I decided to start hitchhiking, and I decided that a good destination would be to visit my cousin Paul Nasrallah, who lived in Colorado Springs. So I hitchhiked, got to Buffalo, Wyoming the first night, and then started heading south. And I tell you, this was in 1981 in Montana, so I certainly, to nobody would I recommend anybody hit, well, you're only going to hitchhike. But back then it was barely a car would pass that wouldn't pick you up, but there weren't too many cars passing. Cars would pick me up and take me to the next exit, and then the next one would, and one single lady with a child picked me up that was going through most of the state of Wyoming, and she said, do you mind driving while I nap? And so I drove her car, stopped and filled it up with gas, and so made it all the way to the outskirts of Denver. But then as soon as you got close to a big city, that's where not only would people not give you a ride, they wouldn't even look at you or slow down. So I resorted back to the good old Greyhound, and I took the Greyhound from Denver to Colorado Springs, where I spent some time with my cousin Paul Nasrallah, who I had met him because he was my father's age, but had not met any of his 5 sons. They all lived in Colorado Springs, so I met with them. One of those sons had just got a job as a truck driver, and that truck driver had just got a job to go from Colorado Springs to Dallas, and he had one of those semi-trucks with a big, cabin in the back of it. So I got to ride in that. that was kind of fun. And as we're getting closer to Dallas, I realized, because I see these billboards, that Delta's offering these really cheap flights on the billboards from Dallas to different destinations, and one of them was Atlanta for $99. And I realized, wait a minute, Reagan was going to, Reagan was either fired or threatened to fire all their traffic controllers, so they're flying again. So I hop a flight from Dallas to Atlanta, and somewhere in there I reached out to my ex-girlfriend at Berry College in Rome, Georgia. Has anybody ever heard of Berry College?
Yeah.
That's where I spent my first year of college. That's where I was, when I went to this special exchange backpacking thing, I was enrolled at Berry College. So I called my girlfriend, who was also from Jacksonville, and mentioned that I would be in Atlanta needing a ride home at this time. And it worked out that was right at the time that she was driving from Rome, Georgia down to Jacksonville. So she said, I'll come pick you up. So my ex-girlfriend, picked me up at the Atlanta airport. And in that 5-hour or so drive to Jacksonville, she had told me how she had gotten involved with a group called the Navigators. And she had committed her life to Christ. And she really felt like that's what I needed to do, because having a relationship with Christ changed her life, and it could change my life. And she thought we could start together anew as a new couple. And I spent that 5 hours going, yeah, I'm good, no thanks. I'm good with God. So I basically heard her telling me all about her new relationship with Christ on the way home. Got back to Jacksonville and spent Christmas break and stuff back in the bars with my friends, basically telling them my epic story of hopping the freight train, hitchhiking, how I got home. I got home very cheap. It was a fun trip. And every time I would tell that story, and I told it several times to different people, I never once mentioned that little bit about asking God to help get me home. And one night after I had been at a bar and had maybe a half a drink too much, possibly, maybe I was buzzed a little bit, going to bed in my bedroom all by myself, not really thinking about anything spiritual, but as I went to bed, the Lord brought to my mind that prayer. And the thought was, you were just talking about this trip, and you didn't once mention that you asked me to help get you home, and you got home safe, and I felt like, and then God reminded me of all those things my girlfriend was telling me, and literally I felt like that was God calling me. I felt like God was saying, I want to have a relationship with you.
Wow.
And that night I said, all right, God, I want to ask you into my life. And I woke up the next morning and I felt like I was a new person.
Wow.
Told my mom I was a Christian, and some of y'all have heard my story before, sorry, but y'all know what she said when I said, hey, I'm a Christian? You were baptized as a baby, and through confirmation you've always been a Christian. The difference was asking the Spirit of the living God to come inside, and that yielding and that surrendering, and it changed my life. So I was coming out of a situation of just basically being a really heavy partier, just drinking a lot. I wouldn't even say I was an alcoholic, but any time I was out doing anything social, it always involved drinking. And that was one of the things that I really knew I needed to stop doing. But what I thought is, I'm going to go back to the bars, have a beer, and share my testimony and talk about Jesus with my friends. And every time I went back and did that, one turned into two, which turned into three. Basically by the end of the night, I just felt like I just didn't really have either the maturity or the self-control to limit that drinking. So I decided, I just need to go cold turkey. I need to stay out of the bars. So as a 20-year-old on the west side of Jacksonville, I was trying to figure out, well, where do I go that is fun and kind of happening, but doesn't involve alcohol? Because I just really wanted to stay away from the scene altogether. And there weren't a whole lot of places. Of course, you could go to a movie or putt-putt or bowling, but I was just looking for something, because I'd often go to gathering spots, and often there'd be music involved. And so I was trying to figure out where to go, and somebody told me about a coffee house at the corner of Timaquan and Ortega Farms on the west side of Jacksonville. And every Friday night, this coffee house that did not serve alcohol would bring in one single Christian rock band. And somebody told me about this little coffee house, and from the first moment I walked in there, it was a godsend, because there was a bunch of other young adults that were hanging out at this coffee house, connecting, building relationships. And there was a band that was playing music, and it was rock music, but it was rock music that was singing about Jesus. So I started listening to these lyrics, and I started, I'm a brand new believer. In fact, I went back to the Presbyterian Church as a new believer. I went there 2 weeks in a row, and I don't know anyway, the pastor was talking so far over my head that I never went back to the Presbyterian Church. I started going to different churches, interdenominational and Baptist churches, and ended up in charismatic churches. But this little coffee house just really helped me, even more than getting plugged into all these different churches. Being in a situation where it was not in a church, it was on a weekend, it was more of social interaction, young adults just connecting and building relationships, and then adding the music along with it. Just that whole vibe, that whole scene was just a real godsend to me spiritually. It helped me take my spirituality out of just going to church, and then those people that I met at the coffee house, I started hanging out with them at different places on Saturday night, and that circle of friends that I met that were all kind of in the same boat, young adults wanting to walk the straight and narrow, we all just kind of did life together. It was just an awesome thing. So probably for 2 years, every Friday night I'd be at this little coffee house. And then I decided to transfer back out to the University of Montana. So I went back to the University of Montana, graduated. After graduation, I moved to Chicago, got married, had kids. I was a COBOL programmer. After our second child came in Chicago, we decided that we either wanted to move closer to family. So we were either going to go to Boise, Idaho, where my wife was from. I met her at the University of Montana, or we were going to come back to Jacksonville. So while I was working in Chicago as a computer programmer, I came to Jacksonville one weekend. I had 6 interviews and I had 3 job offers. So I said, well, I don't even think we need to go to Boise. So I evaluated the prospects, and I took a job with the Ring Power Corporation as a COBOL programmer, and we moved to Jacksonville in the summer of 1987 with a couple of young children, and we were getting settled in Jacksonville when we decided that for Thanksgiving, my wife would fly home and visit her parents. But she wanted to go a little early so she could have an extended vacation with her parents. And with Ring Power, I didn't have any kind of vacation time, so I was going to fly out there right before Thanksgiving. She was going to go like the week before Thanksgiving, and I was going to go right at Thanksgiving. So I booked her a flight to get from Jacksonville to Boise, connecting through Denver. And she got on that flight on a bright, clear, crisp Sunday morning on November 15th, 1987. And back then I could take her to the airport and I could actually get on the plane. We had 2 seats, one for my 2.5-year-old and then one for my wife. It was on the bulkhead, and then my wife was carrying my 6-month-old in her lap. And I got them all settled, and I was able to say a quick prayer, and I was able to go. Back then the Jacksonville airport had an observation deck. And I went on the observation deck, and I watched the plane as it taxied along, and I watched as it went towards the runway, and then as it took off, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. And I'm just, it was just this kind of this neat morning, and I was just worshiping, and I was praying for Ann because she and her parents had some conflict. Part of it, I think, was the fact that we moved to Florida and they're from Idaho, so they weren't too happy about that move. They were rooting that we would move closer to where they are. But I was just praying for the trip, and it was just a bright, clear Sunday morning. I watched that plane all the way until I couldn't see it. I just watched it, drifted away. And then I went on to church. At that time I was going to a place called Agape Fellowship with Jim and Rita Pringle. They're still around. They're still ministering to this day. I went to Agape Christian Fellowship, and we had just rented a house in Murray Hill. This is in 1987, but we had not moved into the house. So we were still staying with my parents. And I was at my parents' house, and one of my high school buddies was out front, and we were tossing the Frisbee in the yard when my father yelled that I needed to come inside. And my father had just gotten a phone call from my father-in-law in Boise, who was, monitoring the flight to figure out when he had to go to the airport to pick up my wife. And he saw on a news report that there was a plane that had a problem in the Denver airport, that on takeoff the plane ended up upside down at the end of the runway. And my father-in-law found out that was the flight number that Ann was on, my wife was on. So my father-in-law called us. So we turn on the news and we see that there's some news story, and all these people have blankets around them, and they're being carted off the airplane into some room, and I'm looking and thinking, I get my itinerary out, and what they say is the flight number. So I start making phone calls, and I start thinking, well, I put them under the care and under the protection of the Lord, and if anybody's going to walk off a plane with that problem, it's going to be my family. And so I started making phone calls, and nobody had any information. And I didn't get any phone calls. So I said, I'm going to Denver. So me and my mom, we got in the car, we rushed down to the airport, we caught the first flight that we could get to Denver. I just went from counter to counter to counter until I get a flight. We get on the plane, we still don't hear anything. We get told that we can't land in Denver because there's a blizzard and there was an airplane incident, so we land in Dallas, Texas. And by the time we land in Dallas, we get off and we're expecting to hear word, and there's no word. No word. Spend the whole night monitoring the news, calling hospitals, calling airlines. The whole night, nothing. The next morning, first thing, we land in Denver. We get off the plane, and they say, They say we have several Jane Does in hospitals that are unidentified. And you're going to have to go and see which one of these Jane Does is your wife, and we have 2 young children in the morgue, and they haven't been identified. 35, almost 35 years later, it's still hard to describe how your world can be turned upside down. But at that point, my thought was, those have to be my children, number one. And I'm going to go there, and I'm going to lay hands on them, and God's going to do a miraculous raising from the dead. So I said, let's go to the morgue first. And I get in the morgue, and they want us to identify the children from pictures. And I said, no, I can't do it. I need to touch them. I need to be with them. So they brought them out on a gurney, across a wall, glass wall. And they still wouldn't let me touch them. By then, my mom, who was with me, had given positive identification, so there really wasn't anything else I could do. And it was just the weight and the heaviness of grief just descended upon me. I actually tried to punch through the wall to get to my children. Left holes in their drywall. The next step was to go and figure out which one of these Jane Does is my wife. And they had a lady that they thought was 50 years old, but she was lactating. So that was their best guess of who my wife was. There was 3 Jane Does in 3 separate hospitals. So which one do you go to first? So we went to the one with this approximately 50-year-old lactating woman. My wife was 22 years old. When they pulled her out of the wreckage, she didn't have any heartbeat or any pulse, but they worked on her, and they got that back. She was severely injured. She had a severe head injury, which caused her head to swell up. And treating all that, they shaved all her hair off. Bruised face, bruised, broken bones. Of course, this is the day after the accident, so by the time I get there, I can't even identify her. While they're going to get her personal effects, which was mostly her wedding band, her engagement ring and her wedding ring, which is how ultimately I was sure that was her, because I really wasn't sure. She was in a bed that was going back and forth. She had tubes everywhere, no hair, swollen face, unconscious, trach. And they said, we're surprised she lived the night, and we don't expect you to live until tomorrow morning. So I just sat there next to her in that bed going back and forth on the 8th floor of the University Hospital in Denver. And I said, well, as soon as she passes, I'm going to grab this big piece of furniture and throw it through the window, and I'm just going to go be with my family. And that was the plan. I stayed up all night with her on this, I think it was really machines that were doing most of the work, but there was nothing that indicated that possibly she could have stayed on these machines for a long time. And the next day went on, the next day went on. If I was right by my wife's bed, I was at least able to stand and be there. If I wasn't, I just crumpled. I couldn't even stand up. Days went on like that. And then I started having a bunch of physical symptoms. I started having all sorts of physical symptoms. I'm in the ICU at the University of Colorado Hospital, so now I'm in a wheelchair with IVs next to this bed, and I've got all sorts of health problems, which they then brought a psychiatrist in who said that I had PTSD, and I'm demanding that I'm not going to leave my wife's side. And it's this open ICU, and you're only supposed to be there for a short amount of time, and I'm causing a scene because I'm not leaving, and it's day after day goes by. And it's so much of a blur, but eventually they started taking things out of my life. They started measuring the pressure in the brain. They started monitoring the vitals, and she was actually showing some signs of improvement. But the prognosis from the neurologist was that if she ever comes to, most likely, based on the damage in her brain, most likely she'll be a vegetable, and she really won't be a functioning adult. During that time, people from all over the country, friends from college, friends from high school, my old pastor, Jim Pringle, came. Lots of people. I mean, that was a case study in how the church mobilizes to support a family. Churches in Denver came to help. I mean, it was an incredible show of support, but I was pretty much out of it. We ended up having to schedule the funeral while she was still in ICU. And that was the only time I left, was to go back home for the funeral. Long story short, no, sorry, it's been 32 years. I don't talk like this too often. I usually give it in a nutshell. But long story short is that was in 1987. So how many years is, who's a math major? 33 years, I think. 32, 33 years. 33 years later, my wife basically had nothing short of a miraculous recovery, yet it took years for her to recover. During that time, I went at times into the depths of despair, but the whole time I went through it, even though my mind was saying one thing and my body was reacting to what my mind was saying, I could feel the presence of the living God inside me. And it's unexplainable, and I call it the amazing grace of God, because I wasn't even in a position to stand up, more or less, kind of go on spiritually, but the Spirit of God was holding me even during that time. And as Ann got better, as Ann came out of the coma, as they took the trach out, and as she started recognizing me, and at first I think she thought I was an old friend from college, because she wasn't overly communicative and she was very confused, but she has a lot of both short-term and long-term memory issues. There's still a lot of things she doesn't remember. Graduating college, having our last child, I mean, there's a lot of things that are just from months before and months after the accident. The good news is that if you met my wife today, and many of you have, you would not know she'd been in an accident. And was a National Honor Merit Scholar. She was on a full scholarship for college. Very bright, very gifted musically, and all of that came back. And as my wife started getting better, which was a long, long process, even though I wasn't physically hurt, I was pretty screwed up, and God started bringing healing and wholeness to my life. And in 1990, against all odds, when they said that because of a lot of internal damages, they didn't think she would be able to have children, she conceived. So God has blessed us with 2 more children that very much favor the first 2 children that are with the Lord. One looks more like me and one looks more like Ann, both times. But God brought healing and wholeness into my life, started getting my feet back under me, and then years later after the accident, in 1993, I was at a church retreat. And at the church retreat, by then, God had blessed us with 2 children. God had healed my wife. God was still in the process of healing me. I was at a church retreat. And at this church retreat, I was just really, to be honest, after all that, was contemplating and dwelling on the goodness of God. In a miraculous way, that God healed my wife. We have children. He's getting me back together. And during that retreat, I was in the woods with my journal and a Bible, and I was asking the Lord, I'm grateful. I'm grateful. What would you want me to do for you? I was wanting just to say, all right, here I am, Lord. And I clearly felt like God was saying, and this had gone way back to the back of my mind, is when I first got back to Jacksonville in 1987. I thought, hey, let me go see what's going on with that coffee house that helped me as a kid. When I went there, that coffee house had been torn down and was gone. And I thought, oh man, that coffee house, that was kind of cool. Somebody ought to do something like that. Then the accident happened, and I forgot all about the coffee house until this day at this retreat. And I felt like God said, remember that coffee house, how much it helped you? How it really gave you a spiritual foundation of taking your faith outside of the church? And I think it was really that foundation that really strengthened me spiritually to kind of get through that tragedy. I mean, it was the Lord, but at that retreat in 1993, I felt like God said, you once said you thought somebody should do something like that coffee house. I think you should do something like that coffee house. And I left that retreat and told the retreat participants that's what I thought. So in 1993, I started looking for some place to do a coffee house. Didn't really find it. Found the old Murray Hill Theater. Felt like, hey, I can try to do that there. Bought the theater, formed a nonprofit, started doing concerts with Christian concerts in an alcohol-free environment to try to recreate that little coffee house. Didn't know if it would last 6 months or 6 years, and it's been 25 years. So God has just done a miraculous healing in my life. He's done a miraculous healing in Ann's life. I think he's done a pretty mighty, awesome thing in the Murray Hill neighborhood. And just to wrap it all up, there's just a few points. Perspective is. I wrote a few down. I'm going to forget what I was thinking. But one is just to realize that even if you're walking with the Lord, and I do want to say that never in my life have I been perfect. Never have I could say that I was completely free of disobedience and carnality in my life. So I wasn't perfect, but I was walking with the Lord, and I was serving Him, and I was walking in His grace and mercy. No matter where you are in your relationship, it's not immunity to tragedy, and it's not just in my life. I'm not saying that because I went through a tragedy. So many saints have gone through, including all the apostles and Jesus Himself went through tragic, painful experiences. So, but in some churches, maybe in slight ways, they teach, hey, if you're walking with God, these types of things won't happen to you. And I think that can be a lie from the pit, because when something bad does happen, you end up shaking your fist at God like I did for a while. Fortunately, God brought healing to me. The other thing is, just use this as a reminder that none of us, not only are none of us guaranteed tomorrow, but none of your children or none of your wives, your spouses are. And just maybe when you go home this evening, this afternoon, just take some time to let them know you love them. Give them a hug, and just don't forget to do that. Don't get caught up in the busyness of life, the busyness of ministry or whatever. Don't neglect, don't forget. Don't sweat the small stuff. I see people getting so upset with family members, with their faith, with God over little things. I tell you, little things, big things, God can bring healing and wholeness. So don't let little rifts or little problems hinder your relationships. You'll probably go on and on. Mostly just really have a real relationship with the living God. Because I kind of think if I hadn't asked Jesus into my, really connected with God in my bedroom that one night, if I'd just been maybe playing church or just knowing about God, I would have still been shaking my fist at God, probably with a whiskey bottle in one hand and shaking my fist in the other. So the grace of God is alive and real, and He can bring healing and wholeness in the situation. Thank you.